You ever feel the pressure of culture? You ever feel the pressure of the way things are going in the world and in our country? You read the news or watch the news, you see what's going on, or you just turn on just a TV show. You just want a little bit of entertainment in the evening, and all of a sudden there are things in front of your eyes that we disagree with, practices that should not be practiced, things that God says are either sinful or sometimes just downright abominations. And it's not that these things are just being shown. Those of my generation, we grew up watching westerns and war movies where people were being killed, but the killing wasn't glorified in a way that says, you kids go out and do this now, go kill people. That wasn't the idea. The idea was there was conflict, and brave people stood up in that conflict to say, we're going to push back. That was the general idea of most of those stories and movies then. But now a lot of the things we're seeing and hearing in our culture and even talking to people, they are things we need to push back against in a kind and gentle but a very firm way. And that's exactly what Jesus did. Right here in the Sermon on the Mount, very close to the Sermon on the Mount, but in Matthew chapter 4, Jesus has been tempted. And as Owen read for us, he was 40 days and 40 nights without food, and he was hungry. So the devil comes to him. And he's not called the devil in verse 3. What is he called? He's called the tempter. The tempter, the one who's trying to get Jesus to do something that is not right. And that's what our culture is doing today. It's trying to influence us to think in ways and act in ways that are not right. But the tempter comes to him and he says, if you're the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. Jesus certainly had the ability to do just that. With a thought, he could have turned those stones to bread and fed himself and pacified his hunger. He could have turned them into a steak. Would have been a kosher steak, but he could have done that. Stew, lasagna. I don't know if lasagna had even been invented, but anything he wanted to have, he could have said the word and those stones would have become that. But what did Jesus say? It's not so much what he said, although that's extremely important, but here for this lesson, the fact is he pushed back. He pushed back. How did he push back? He said, it is written. That's how we need to learn to push back. If you and I push back against the evil influences of culture in this world, and not all culture is evil, but when that influence is evil, we need to learn how to push back, and to push back as Jesus would push back. Push back with the Word. Because if there's not the Word in it, we don't need to be pushing back anyway. But if the Word is there, we need to push back for ourselves, push back for our children, push back for our communities, push back for the nation, push back for the world, push back for anybody who will listen, push back to say, not going to do it because it is written. And what he said, what he quoted was so profound. Man will not live by bread alone, but by every word. Every word, not the ones we want to pick and choose between or through, but by every word of God. That's how we will live. Now think about what he's saying. We eat food to live. How many of you are looking forward to lunch? I am. See, I just put that seed thought in your brain. You're going to be thinking about that the rest of this lesson. What are we having for lunch? That's what we do, isn't it? We go from meal to meal, and hey, what are we going to do? I don't know. Somebody died. Well, let's go eat. Well, somebody was born. Well, let's go eat. Hey, we just lost a ball game. Well, let's go get some ice cream. Cheer everybody. We just won a ball game. Hey, let's go get some ice cream. You know how it is with us. It's natural. It's normal. Nothing wrong with it. But we don't live by bread alone, do we? We live by the Word of God. That's our real food. Jesus was pushing back. So it says in verse 5, the devil took him up to the holy city and he had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple, highest place of the temple, the highest place in Jerusalem. And what did he say? Cast yourself down. What did Jesus say? I think he said, it's written. It is written. And there it is. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test. So the devil takes him up to a very high mountain. Took him up to the pinnacle of the temple. I guess that wasn't high enough. Took him up to a high mountain so he could see all the kingdoms of the world. And he said, if you'll fall down and worship me, I'll give you all these. Which is, it's really interesting, because what did Jesus say just before he ascended to the Father? All authority is given to me, where? In heaven and in earth. Jesus knew this is nothing. What the devil is offering is nothing. He knew what he was going to be given. And yet here, in the flesh, he was tempted. If he wasn't tempted, if there wasn't part of him that desired what the devil was offering, it wouldn't have been a temptation, but it was a temptation because his flesh wanted that. But his spirit knew differently. And I believe it was his soul that decided to go with God. And he says again, a third time, it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Jesus pushed back. He was pushing back here against the devil. Later on, let's read in John chapter 8 how he pushed back against people, because that's what we're doing. We're pushing back against people. John chapter 8. This is a long, like a conversation. What's it called when several people are talking and there's back and forth, give and take, discussion, dialogue. Yeah, there it is. That's the word I'm looking for. I don't need notes. I'll just ask you guys. You'll tell me what it is. Look at chapter 8 of John, verse 12. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. So the Pharisees said to him, you're testifying about yourself. Your testimony is not true. What they were doing was commenting on the law. The law said you had to have at least 2 witnesses. And they're saying, nobody else here is testifying that. You're the only one testifying that, so your testimony is not true. Jesus answered and said to them, even if I testify about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I come from and where I'm going, but you do not know where I come from or where I'm going. You judge according to the flesh. I am not judging anyone. What do we learn from this? He said to them, you are judging according to the flesh. I found it to be very helpful when I'm discussing moral issues with people to ask them, what is their standard of morality? And a lot of people just kind of they'll get a blank look on their face, like, what do you mean? What's my standard of morality? Because I only ask that when they're arguing against what I'm trying to argue in favor of. I'm pushing back in favor of God's way. And people will say to you when you do that, oh, you're pushing religion. Okay. I'm not really, I'm pushing God. Well, that didn't sound right, did it? I'm promoting God, we'll say it that way. I'm promoting God to them. They take like I'm pushing God. It's like a lot of people say when you bring your children to Bible class in the church, other people will say you're ramming religion down their throat. No, you need to be quiet. This is my family. And I will raise them according to the way I believe God wants me to. Because what are those people doing with their families? They're raising their families the way they want to. So if they say, you're pushing religion, ask the question, well, what is your standard for morality? Now, if their standard's not religion, what's it going to be? I mean, it's a pretty limited number of responses to that. Opinion of the world? Is that what you're basing your moral standard on? You accuse me of basing my moral standard on religion. What are you basing your moral standard on? Turn it right back on them. This is just pushing back. You're not being ugly. You're not being hateful. You're just trying to get them to think about where they're coming from, and they don't know. They know they've got an opinion, but they can't really tell you where it comes from unless they're willing to admit it's a non-authoritative source. Because their opinion will come from the opinion of the world. This is what I've seen on TV. This is what I've seen in the movies. This is what I've been told by other people. But there's no authoritative source for anything that's wrong. Think about that. Unless you go back to the devil as your authoritative source. No, I've just given away where Jesus is going here. And if you're familiar with John chapter 8, you know about that. But ask him, what is your standard? If you're accusing me of using religion as a standard, well, okay, what are you using? And by the way, if what you're arguing for is what you believe more than anything else in the world, isn't that essentially the same as religion? That's all you're doing. You're arguing for what you believe the most. I'm arguing for what I believe the most. What's your standard for what you believe the most? I'm telling you what mine is. It's God. Now, you can mock that and make fun of that, but here's the thing about people. Even though they'll deny it, and even though they may have gotten to the point in their lives where they have hardened their hearts that they don't think about it anymore, everybody knows there's a God. The whole reason we talk about morality is because we're talking about what we ought to do. And when you're talking about what you ought to do, you are automatically giving up this idea that there is an ought. And the only way there can be an ought, something I should do, is by knowing that there's somebody somewhere who has delineated between what we should do and what we should not do. Well, who's that going to come down to? Popular opinion? I don't think so. Government? You're going to base your moral decisions on what the government says? I'm pick a side. You can pick conservative, liberal, somewhere in between. No, don't pick either one of those. Ask them what their standard is. You know what your standard is. Don't let anybody tell you you can't argue religion, you can't argue the Bible. You stand up for what you believe in because they're standing up for what they believe in, and you've got just as much right. Just as much right. People want to talk about rights. You've got just as much right to stand up for what you believe in as they do. Chapter 8, verse 31. I know we're skipping through some of this, but I've only got 30 minutes or so, or 50 minutes, or an hour and a half. Yeah, you're laughing because you don't know, do you? Verse 31, Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed him, if you continue in my word, then you're truly disciples of mine. Hey, isn't that neat? There were some Jews there who believed him. Think about that. On almost every page of the Gospels, we see him being confronted and contradicted and demeaned by so many of the Jews, but there were some Jews who believed in him, and he's talking to him. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And they answered him, we're Abraham's descendants and have never yet been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say we'll become free? I think this was an honest question. Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son does remain forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you're Abraham's descendants, yet you seek to kill me, because my word has no place in you. I speak the things which I have seen with my Father, therefore you also do the things which you have heard from your father. I believe as Jesus was saying these things, he was saying them to Jews who believed him, but at the same time there were Jews there, it seems in the context, who did not. And each group knew who they were. And here's the thing I get out of this. When you're out in the public domain and you're discussing something, it could be at a coffee shop where somebody at the next table is overhearing your conversation. It could be in a line at Walmart when you're talking to somebody at the checkout line. And you got plenty of time to talk to people in the checkout line, believe me, I've been there. It could be you're on Facebook. It could be any number of situations, but you're talking to somebody about moral issues, and you might be thinking in your head, it's pointless to talk to these people because, well, remember what Jesus said about cast not your pearls before swine? Don't give your holy things to dogs. He wasn't talking about pigs and dogs. He was talking about people. You have to make a distinction who's worth talking to about these things. But here's the deal. Here's another deal. And this is what Jesus is practicing here. While you're talking to somebody who may not listen, there may be somebody listening who needs to hear and will hear what you have to say. It happens all the time. You pull up one of these talk shows where they're talking back and forth about these moral issues. And I get so aggravated sometimes because they supposedly bring somebody in for an interview and then they never shut up. They won't let them talk. But when they do talk, even though you know they're not going to change the mind of the interviewer, how many other people are hearing what they have to say? And it's marvelous. The interviewer has provided the means for the one they're interviewing and trying to destroy to put the word out to people who are willing to listen and hear it. There were people here who wanted to destroy Jesus, but in the mix of all that, he was able to say things that people needed to hear. That's what you and I need to do. We need to be talking to people. We need to be communicating with people who disagree with us. It doesn't take courage when we come together as a group in Christ and we worship with one another. That's fantastic. Where it takes the courage is when we go out those doors into the world where Jesus says, I want you to be lights. When Jesus says, I want you to be lights, that doesn't mean you go out into the world as a Christian and you do this. Just hide from everything and everybody. Never talk about any ideas that might be controversial. Never talk about things that people might get upset about. Never do that. Be nice. You know how many truths have died on the altar of niceness? Think about it. Now, I want to be nice. I don't want to be ugly and hateful and turn people away and turn people off. But there's a time when we need to forget about being nice and think about and commit ourselves to being honest. I'm so glad when my doctor saw those cancer cells that she didn't say, you know, it wouldn't be very nice to call up Mr. Kessler and tell him he's got cancer. Oh no, Mr. Kessler needed to hear that. Because if Mr. Kessler's got any sense, he's going to talk to people and take steps to get that eradicated. It's crazy the things people are offended about these days. And everybody seems to be offended about everything, but that's not exactly true. You're not offended about everything, are you? But some people seem to be. You just got to tippy-toe everywhere you go. Be careful how you refer to somebody as a man or a woman. Yeah, I've made that mistake, and you have too probably. Yeah, hello, sir. I'm a man. Whoa, sorry. It's crazy. Yeah, I've done it. You probably have too. All right, John chapter 8. Let's go back and let's look at verse 42. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you'd love me. For I've proceeded forth and have come from God, but I've not even come on my own initiative, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I'm saying? He asks a question and he's going to answer it. What's his answer? Why do you not understand what I'm saying? It's because you cannot hear my word. You are of your father, the devil. You want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I speak truth, why do you not believe me? He who is of God hears the words of God. For this reason you do not hear them, because you are not of God. Boom! How nice was that? The only way you can consider that nice is if you think about the reality that he was trying to convey. Why does somebody run out in the road and grab somebody and pull them out of the way of a truck that's barreling down the highway? Why do they do that? Because they care about that person. They love them. They want them to be saved. But if somebody's out there in the middle of the road about to be struck down and they don't know it, hey, I'm out in the middle of the road. I'm about to be roadkill. But I don't know it. So I'm happy. I think this is where I need to be. And that's the way people are in the world. They're talking about things because they've heard things. They've got some idea in their head, and they think for some reason that's right. However crazy it might be, that's where they are. Somebody needs to do something to save them. How are you going to save them? Probably not going to do it by going up to them and say, hey, how you doing today? You think that's what somebody does when the truck's coming down the road, walk out in the street, hey, how you doing today? Do you see that truck? Pow! A little bit late. You got to make an impact. Got to make an impact. You parents with children, I hope you know you've got to make an impact. When your children are behaving in a way that challenges your authority, spank them. Nothing else will make the impact that spanking will make. I see kids shaking their heads. No, that's not the way. I read the book, Dad. That's not right. That's not the book I read. Spank them. You read through Proverbs just once, just a cursory reading of Proverbs, and Proverbs over and over you see Solomon say, spank that boy. The blueness of a wound cleanses away evil. Spank him and do not spare for his crying. You'll deliver his soul from hell. We don't like to do that because it's hard. It's confrontational. But when somebody's challenging authority, your authority as a parent, they need to be spanked. And they need to be spanked until they cry. Now, oh, Mom, that's just cruel. Somebody's going to hear this and go, we got to get the Department of Human Services down on this guy. If they don't cry, they will not be deterred from their bad behavior. You ever had a child turn around to you and say, that didn't hurt? Oh, that was just the pre-spanking. Now, we're laughing because we see the humor in it, but you know as well as I do, this is serious business. Jesus was giving them a spanking. They're not listening to him. He says, you're of your father, the devil. I'm not trying to be nice to you. I'm trying to convert you. And if not you, I'm trying to get other people to see, oh, hey, we better back off. Jesus is getting real with these guys. He's telling them who their father is. I wonder what he'd say about me. Truth. Truth. Never be afraid to speak truth. Speak it in love, but speak truth. Don't ever back off of truth. Amen. Stick with it. Put it out there. Be the light. Be a city on a hill that people can look at from a distance and see that's the city we're going to right there. Be salt. Influence the world. Influence the people you talk to. Influence the people who are listening to you, even if you don't know that they're part of the conversation. Get out there and push back against this evil world that we're living in. And this is nothing new. The world being evil isn't something new. It's not something that happened in our generation. The world's been this way ever since creation. Ever since God said to Adam and Eve, you got to get out of this garden. The world's been a mess. It's still a mess. And Jesus is the only hope for it. We got to get him out there. John chapter 8, verse 48. The last text here we'll look at. I think. Did I mark any others? Okay. The Jews answered and said to him, do we not say rightly that you're a Samaritan and a demon? Have a demon? Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Here's one last point. When people get to the stage where they're insulting you, you know what that means? That means they don't have an argument anymore. If they had an argument, they'd give you, well, you're stupid because of this. Here's the reason why you're stupid. Here's the reason why you've got a demon. Don't waste your time defending insults, supposed insults, against your character. That's not going to help anything. You're not on trial. They're on trial. Keep that in mind. They're on trial before God. You're the lawyer who's trying to convict and convince them that they are in the wrong. Because there's going to be a judgment day. And the one you're arguing for is the judge. These people are going to face that judge. I don't want people to face that judge on the final day and say, well, I was with Marty Kessler. He never said anything about this. I saw him all the time. Just rubbed shoulders with him. He never said anything about that. Why didn't he say anything to me about it? You know who else is going to be there? I'm going to be there. And I don't want to hear that on Judgment Day. I want God to be able to say, you're condemned, pointing to somebody who's legitimate, not to me, but, but to those who've lived their lives the way they want to, and be able to say to at least some of them, didn't my servant Marty Kessler warn you? And I'm not talking about warning people in church. If that's the only place I'm warning people, I'm failing. If this is the only place I talk to people about the gospel and about sin and about what's right and wrong, And how they need to make changes? I'm failing. And you are too. We need to be in the world, pushing back in love, pushing back with grace, pushing back with mercy, pushing back with compassion, like Jude says, that we might save some people, snatching them even out of the fire. That's scary stuff. And it's what we are in the business of if we think about the business that our Father has given us. We're going to stand and sing a song of encouragement because there might be somebody here and you know you can't push back against the gospel anymore. You know that gospel is truth. You know you need to obey it. And we've got the water up here. We had it running, by the way. Somebody had it running, filling it up just right. So it's just at the perfect level for a baptism if you're thinking you need to come into the kingdom today. You heard Steve get up here and pray wonderfully for those who have needs. If you have needs that need prayers, we'll pray with you the same way because God is always listening. Whatever your need might be this morning, we're inviting you in this song to let us know how we might serve you today. Let's stand and sing together.